Yes? Oh, come in, Larry. This is Mr. Montgomery. I met him a few weeks ago in New York.
Oh, how are you? You live here?
Yes.
Well, maybe you know what a zombie is.
When a person dies and is buried, it seems there are certain voodoo priests who have the power to bring him back to life.
How horrible.
It's worse than horrible because a zombie has no will of his own. You see them sometimes walking around blindly with dead eyes, following orders, not knowing what they do, not caring.
You mean like Democrats?
The following has been rated PC for politically correct.
Pay attention, you just may learn something.
It's the Sage, Larry Elder.
The article is up on LarryElder.com. It's called California Elections Compromised by State Legislature. Quote, dead voters are just the tip of the iceberg of California's compromised elections process. Fraudulent dead voters are concerning, but voter fraud is an even bigger problem in close races. Now 16-year-olds can pre-register to vote in California. Free postage on mail ballots is coming next. California is moving to make the entire state all vote by mail. As I mentioned, it was published in the California Globe. The editor of California Globe is my next guest, Katie Grimes. She's a political analyst, a writer, and an author, covers the California legislature, and is, I mentioned, the editor of the California Globe. Please welcome Katie Grimes to the program. Ms. Grimes, thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Hi, Larry. Thanks for having me back.
Thank you, Katie. I could not believe this article when I read it. I mean, my goodness. Top 2 primary election automatic voter registration through the DMV, allowing non-citizens to vote. And then we have this ballot harvesting.
Yeah, it's just getting worse with every election. Before we even go any further, I really encourage every one of your listeners to go to the website for the Election Integrity Project, which has been doing the most amazing research for years. I spoke with one of the founders, Linda Payne, in an interview, and even what she had to tell me was enlightening. The ballot harvesting obviously was enshrined in the legislature in 2016. And I have to tell you, Larry, as much as I am in and out of that Capitol, I didn't even know that the ballot harvesting bill had passed, and Republicans didn't even make a stink out of it. So it was pretty shocking then when we watched all those congressional seats get flipped this last election. The media claims that it's, because of Donald Trump, but not in California. It was because of ballot harvesting. Katie
Grimes, as you know, there isn't a single Republican from the House now in Orange County, which used to be the most reliable Republican district in the entire country. Did ballot harvesting cause all 4 to lose their seats?
Yes, because most of the seats on election night looked like they were either very, very close races or the Republican was ahead. But the ballot harvesting law states that the California elections offices have for 30 days, 1 month after the election, to count their ballots, which really only means they've got a month to come up with the ballots they need to flip the seats.
So the term harvesting means exactly what? What do they do to harvest ballots?
Well, what they claim they're doing is making sure that all the provisional ballots get counted, that every person that feels disenfranchised, make sure they have a vote. But really what's happening, Larry, and this is according to the election integrity people, the Democrats are not harvesting legitimate ballots. They are manufacturing ballots, and they've got a month to do it after the election.
How do they manufacture them?
Well, we've heard stories of all the dead voters. We've heard stories of trunkloads of ballots mysteriously showing up, or magically showing up in some cases, without any proper, chains of, the proper processes that are supposed to happen. And it's that kind of stuff that, we used to think only happened in the South. That's happening pretty regularly in California now.
Mm-hmm. Talk to me about the automatic registration at the DMV and whether or not there's voter fraud going on through that program.
There's absolutely fraud going on through that program. Several of us in the state who cover the California for politics have been warning desperately about the California Motor Voter Act. The law was passed a few years ago. And in the law, it specifically stated that the DMV needed to keep a separate database of illegal immigrants who came in to get a driver's license to make sure that they did not get registered to vote via the Secretary of State's office through this automatic voter registration, but that is not what they did. I had a couple of very, very good sources inside the DMV that said the DMV, under the instructions of the Secretary of State, kept that database under lock and key, and instead they were magically registered to vote.
Unbelievable. Katie Grimes is my guest. She's editor of the California Globe. The website is californiaglobe.com. Katie, in the article that's up on larryelder.com, California's elections compromised by state legislature, the number of Democrats that come out of community organizing that have experience with voter organization has changed everything, according to the Sacramento Bee. How so?
Well, we're seeing people that I think community organizers and voter organization, frankly, is code language for how to manufacture the votes that are needed. We had a president that was a community organizer, and everybody questioned what that really was about. And in California, these folks are coming out of labor unions. They're coming out of these community organizing groups very attached to labor unions. And really what it means, Larry, is there isn't anything they won't do to make sure that they win a seat.
Katie Grimes, are illegal aliens voting in California?
Absolutely they are.
And how is that? How do they pull that off?
Well, Larry, nobody requires identification when you show up at the ballot. And that is the biggest problem. As we always say, I have to show my ID for all kinds of things, including, buying a bottle of wine, that we don't require voter ID at the ballot, and yet we've provided illegal aliens with driver's licenses that are supposed to have a very clear demarcation on it, would be the only way to prevent that.
Katie Grimes, we have about 60 seconds left. How has the top two primary contest thing worked out so that the top two vote getters run against each other even if they're the same party? How has that changed things in California?
Well, it's completely taken most Republicans out of races. I mean, I'm watching one here in Northern California that actually is two Republicans, which is very rare. But what it did was they claimed it would take all the money out of races. In fact, the opposite happened, and the labor unions have been able to make sure that the top two, because of spending, are Democrats.
30 seconds left, Katie. How do we undo the ballot harvesting thing since it's already gone through?
It would have to be through legislation again, and the Election Integrity Project folks have actually a lot of the federal officials looking into this because it is affecting federal elections now.
Katie Grimes, thank you very much for coming on. The article is called California's Elections Compromised by State Legislature. Her website is californiaglobe.com. Katie, thanks for taking the time.
Thanks, Larry.
Well, the culprit in the mass GOP losses in California has now been discovered. Now we know how the Democrats cheated. Jim Hoff for the Gateway Pundit reports California lost 7 of its 14 Republican House seats this election cycle. This was after the state legislature passed ballot harvesting laws. Now, ballot harvesting is illegal in most states. In Texas, New York, Pennsylvania, they arrest people for ballot harvesting. But in California now, they passed a law 2 years ago that makes it legal. The GOP lost 17 of 14 House seats by ballot harvesting this year alone. The seats were lost after the election day. Take a look at
Other Republican Party officials are concerned about so-called ballot harvesting. Party workers going door to door and offering to deliver voters mail-in ballots on their behalf.
It's illegal in most every state of the union. In Texas and in New York State and Pennsylvania, they arrest people and put them in jail for ballot harvesting. In California, they made it legal 2 years ago.
Unbelievable. They made it legal. Wow. Passes a barely noticed change in the state's vote by mail procedures in 2016, signed by then Governor Jerry Brown. California's AB 1921 allows voters to give any third party, not just a relative or someone living in the same household, as was previously the law, to collect and turn in anyone else's completed ballot. There's nothing, absolutely nothing, the Democrats won't do to steal elections. Comment below, and we'll see you at the next report. For the Next News Network, I'm Gary Franchi.
With tomorrow's news today, this is Headlines with a Voice.
As the polls closed on Election Day last month, 6 California Republican House candidates, including Representatives Dana Rohrabacher, Steve Knight, and Mimi Walters, were ahead in their respective races. However, as the absentee and provisional ballots rolled in over the intervening weeks, all 6 lost to their Democratic opponents. The case of Korean-American GOP candidate Young Kim was one of the most prominent examples. On election night, Kim held an 8,000-vote lead over her Democratic opponent, Gil Cisneros, and even attended freshman orientation in Washington, D.C., before watching her lead and her victory slowly evaporate over the subsequent weeks. The results drew the attention of House Speaker Paul Ryan. "California just defies logic to me," said Ryan at a Washington Post live event. "We were only down 26 seats the night of the election, and 3 weeks later we lost basically every California contested race. This election system they have, I can't begin to understand what ballot harvesting is." Well, Paul, I'm going to explain it to you, so listen up. The stunning turnaround in California of all states can be attributed to several factors, as conservative critics like the Federalist's Bree Payton wrote, but the most significant of those seem to be the practice of ballot harvesting. Passed as a barely noticed change in the state's vote-by-mail procedures in 2016, and signed by then-Governor Jerry Brown, California's AB 1921 allows voters to give any third party, not just a relative or someone living in the same household as was previously the law, to collect and turn in anyone else's completed ballot. Called ballot harvesting, critics say that the practice is ripe for fraud. Consider Lulu, who was recorded trying to harvest what she thought was a Democratic voter's ballot in Representative Knight's district. "It's a new service," said Lulu, "for, like, people who are supporting the Democratic Party." The San Francisco Chronicle reported that 250,000 such ballots were used in Orange County alone, resulting in a Democratic sweep there. The Chronicle went on to quote Republicans who admitted that Democrats clearly beat them at the new game, and that to compete, they'll have to conduct their own ballot harvesting efforts. Before its passage, a group opposed to the bill wrote, "AB 1921 would allow anybody to walk into an elections office and hand over truckloads of vote-by-mail envelopes with ballots inside. No questions asked, no verified records kept. It amounts to an open invitation to large-scale vote buying, voter coercion, granny farming, and automated forgery. AB 1921 solves no problems that a simple stamp can't solve." Narrator's note. Actually, it does. It solves the problem of losing for Democrats. With AB 1921, that problem is solved. I hope that clears it up for you, Paul. With your daily digest of current events and commentary, this has been Headlines with a Voice.
Under new California law, people will be allowed to register to vote, and it'll happen actually automatically when they obtain or renew their driver's license, regardless of whether they're U.S. citizens. As leftist politicians import voters, they still don't seem to understand that there are actually dangers when this happens. And the latest evidence, an illegal immigrant Uber driver was arraigned just yesterday. He's alleged to have raped and robbed 4 young women in San Luis Obispo. Let's get into this now with New York Times bestselling author Ann Coulter in New York. And here in studio with me is Jose Aristimuño, who's a former Deputy National Press Secretary for the Democratic Party. Jose, let's start with you on this. Registering people to vote who are here illegally. Explain that one to me.
Well, let's be clear here. This policy that's going to be implemented in April, this is what's going to happen. Voters if you are in the country and you're undocumented, you can gain a driver's license in California.
Right, you already can do that.
Right, but there are federal limitations, including you cannot register to vote if you're an undocumented immigrant in California. And they were very clear. The state of California has been very clear. You will not be eligible to vote if you're an undocumented immigrant. It's that simple.
And why is the big fuss if that's all it is? You'll be eligible, but you can't vote.
Yes, illegal aliens are big rules followers. Even before California was issuing driver's licenses to illegals and automatically registering them to vote, there are big Hispanic organizations and leftist organizations generally in California in the 90s that managed to steal an election from Bob Dornan. I mean, they found hundreds of illegally registered to vote illegal aliens who were voted for. Already 60%, or about 60% of all ballots in California are sent in by mail. It's not even the illegal aliens who need to go and vote. Don't worry, they'll be voted for. You just need them registered to vote.
And why did Trump close that voter commission? Because the states would not cooperate. You know, the voter fraud commission, they made a big deal of it. The left kind of mocked him, and then they closed it. Was that because states just wouldn't give the information, or they couldn't find any evidence, or what was it?
I'm not sure, but I don't think it was a good idea, except that I think it might have just been moved to an official investigation with the Department of Justice. Incidentally, because of California's giving driver's licenses to illegal aliens, people are always saying, oh, it's so burdensome for people to have to get an ID in order to vote. Well, now all legal residents of California are required to now get a secondary ID in addition to their driver's license because of a federal law that says, hey, all of you states that are issuing phony ID laws, we need a real one now. So there's now the real driver's license you have to go into the inner circle of hell and register for all over again. And when they start giving that to illegal aliens, they'll have to have the real ID. So they don't mind burdening their citizens that way. But yes, this is all about voting. Illegal immigration, legal immigration, but certainly illegal immigration, DACA, it is 100% about voting.
I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. Good evening. I welcome Congressman Devin Nunes, 22 California, Fresno, San Joaquin Valley, the breadbasket of the solar system, who keeps a podcast I highly recommend to watch California and also to watch the inquiry that the congressman has been part of these last 2.5 years, watching the behavior, the conduct, the mystery of the Obama administration during the election of 2016. Following that, watching Mr. Mueller's investigation, which has now led to the revelation of a hoax. But we begin with the podcast because California's Republican Party, from the vantage of New York, has almost disappeared in recent elections. The question is, what is the future? There's always a bottom and there's always a top. Devin, a very good evening to you. I want to press this because what I witnessed in 2018 in the election was the Democratic Party in California conducting the election with the word harvesting votes. Can you explain that, Devin? And is there an answer to what is harvesting in California, and what is the Republican answer to what was clearly an advantage for the Democrats?
So what they've done now is whenever you go into the Department of Motor Vehicles for anything, you have to register to vote, even if you do not want to. So now what's happening, and they're requiring new driver's license. So basically everybody in California is having to go through this process. And if you're not registered, you automatically get registered and you automatically get a ballot sent to your house. One of the advantages that the Democrats had this time is they actually took and harvested all the data first from all of these new voters. And so they were using, so-called nonprofits to call all these voters, go knock on their door, and ID these voters. At that point, they identified, okay, which of these voters, if they turn out, would be most likely to vote Democrat. The other thing now that's legal is you can actually go to the door and tell the person, hey, if you give me your ballot, I'll take it in for you. So they did a very good job of getting the data, then knowing who to go knock on the door and either get them to drop it in the mailbox immediately or take it to the polling place for them. And these are ballots that get mailed out about a month ahead of time. So California is awash in ballots. There's tens of millions of dollars that got spent on behalf of left-wing groups to identify these voters. So everybody in California has a ballot now. So it is just right for what in most states would be considered voter fraud. So voter fraud is now legal in California. And basically what the Republicans have to do is we have to go do the same thing. So we have to identify voters, that are unlikely to vote, but if they would vote, would they tend to vote more conservative or at least center-right? And so, once again, we're outgunned by a lot, but, we have to play on the voter fraud field with the Democrats, with the left. We have no choice. So things that are illegal in almost every state are perfectly legal now in California.
I want to report what I've read anecdotally about how this worked in 2018. It said, the reports that I read, there were two different reports, that these NGOs or these nonprofits who were associated in one instance with public service unions would call upon a potential voter the day after the ballots closed, after the polls closed. You had a period of time to report a vote and would ask if they'd voted. If they hadn't, would fill it out for them, Devin? Is there any way of policing this?
Well, let me get you've got most of the story, John, right, but the ballots had to be mailed by election day. But what they allowed, as long as they were postmarked that day, it used to be in the past your ballot had to arrive on election day. But because it was postmarked, so then they just kept counting as these ballots kept kind of rolling in. The other thing is if the ballot was, if you didn't sign your ballot correctly or that sort of thing, as they were counting them, then they could be called. The person you could take the ballot out to the person's house so they could then sign it properly and fill it out properly and get it back in. So there were, I wouldn't say there were thousands of those in congressional districts, but there were definitely hundreds of those where that happened in these very close races. As you know, we used to have 14 congressional seats. We're down to 7 now that are controlled by Republicans. And I think nearly all 7 of those on election night, okay, when all the ballots were counted on election night, we were ahead in every single one of those districts. After 3 weeks of counting, we lost every single one of those districts.
3 weeks of counting. There's a puzzle there. So all the ballots were postmarked the day of the election, but it took them 3 weeks to certify all those ballots. What calls my attention here is all of Orange County was wiped out, all of it. And that's a sophisticated, extremely well-to-do area of California. There's nothing rural about it, and people are in communication all the time. So is there transparency in this project of vote harvesting? Are people policing it?
No, there'll be zero policing. Ballots will be everywhere. Every household will have multiple ballots. I actually know people who got 3 ballots mailed to their house. And I know people that the DMV, the system is ripe with fraud also because the DMV was actually re-registering people at different addresses. So we had people that had been registered at an address for many, many years. And, somehow the computer system registered them instead of being Republican, as they had been for decades, they were re-registered in another county as a no-party preference. So it's just wild stuff, ripe for manipulation and ripe for fraud.
Congressman Devin Nunes, 22 California. His podcast at iTunes is available. His conversation with the new chairman of the California Republican Party. Harvesting is legal in California, and the Republicans will answer. When we come back, the investigation in Washington, now more appropriately called Spygate. I'm John Batchelor. This is The John Batchelor Show.
I'm John B. Wells, and you're watching the Next News Network.
Well, it looks like California-style ballot harvesting may be coming to a state near you. Randy DeSoto for the Western Journal reports a change in California's election law appears to have yielded a major shift to the left in the state's congressional delegation makeup. And the voting rights group iVote, which notched noteworthy wins during the midterms, is pushing for other states to liberalize their voting laws as well. The number of California GOP representatives dropped in half from 14 to 7 of the Golden State's 53 seats in last month's midterm election. Take a look.
Did it happen? For one of the down congressmen, Dana Rohrabacher, the answer is simple.
This election was bought and paid for by outside billionaires.
He points the finger at anti-Trump campaigner Tom Steyer and potential Democratic presidential contender Michael Bloomberg, who put more than $4 million into the fight to beat Rohrabacher.
I've never seen a better example of money corrupting our political system.
Other Republican Party officials are concerned about so-called ballot harvesting. Party workers going door to door and offering to deliver voters mail-in ballots on their behalf.
It's illegal in most every state of the union. In Texas and in New York State and Pennsylvania, they arrest people and put them in jail for ballot harvesting. In California, they made it legal 2 years ago.
The real reason the blue wave washed over so many Republicans, Trump argues, is the
Yeah, so basically they want to come to your door. Oh, yeah, I'll take this in for you. Don't worry, I'll cast your ballot for you. No problem. Meanwhile, on their way to the mailbox, they take out their own version of your vote and change it to what they think it should be. Many are pointing to legislation the Democratic California Governor Jerry Brown signed into law 2 years ago legalizing so-called ballot harvesting for mail-in ballots as the explanation for the unexpected election results. Prior to the change in the law, only the voter, a family member, or someone living in the same household could drop off the ballot at a polling place if it was not mailed. Now, the Democrats can send out operatives all over the state to pick up the ballot. Well, do you a favor. The San Francisco Chronicle reported that 250,000 harvested ballots were submitted in Orange County alone, which resulted in a Democrat sweep in the once Republican stronghold. House Speaker Paul Ryan expressed astonishment at the number of California Republicans who lost their races despite being up on election night. Watch this.
In California, it just defies logic to me. We had a lot of wins that night. We were only down 26 seats the night of the election. And 3 weeks later, we lost basically every contested California race. This election system they have, I can't begin to understand what ballot harvesting is. When you have candidates that win the absentee ballot vote, win the day of the vote, and then lose 3 weeks later because of provisionals, that's really bizarre. And so I just think that that's a very, very strange outcome. When you win the absentee ballots and you win the in-person vote, where I come from, you win the election.
Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. Total theft, election theft right there. Democrat California Secretary of State Alex Padilla, who oversees the state's election, pushed back, saying in a statement, "It's bizarre that Paul Ryan cannot grasp basic voting rights protections." Oh, yeah? Is that a voting right? Oh, we're going to come to your house and pick up your vote for you? The liberal voting rights group iVote is seeking to institute these types of changes that Padilla lauded in all 50 states, according to iVote's website, and its stated goal is to expand voter access by instituting automatic voter registration nationwide in order to elect more Democrats. Ballot harvesting works hand in glove with automatic registration by actively soliciting people in the newly expanded voter rolls to fill out their ballots and then collecting them. Arizona, other states have banned ballot harvesting, arguing it is ripe for fraud. No wonder the Democrats want to have it. You know, Republicans, the GOP, are completely screwed unless they start to aggressively challenge these attempts at stealing elections. This ballot harvesting is ripe for fraud, and it will allow illegal immigrants and the dead to vote completely unchallenged. It's time to do something about this. It's time to stop it dead in its tracks. Comment below. And we'll see you at the next report. For the Next News Network, I'm Gary Franchi.